This is Mutcho TV Town Hall, where we learn from one another and grow. My name is Janvier Nahimana. I'm with my co-hosts, Sarah and Mohammed. Our special guest is Andy Fillmore, Nova Scotia Member for Parliament to the House of Commons. Welcome, Andy Fillmore, to Mutcho TV.
2020 has been a crazy year, from COVID to the Black Lives Matter movement and all this situation. I wanted to ask you particularly, what is your government doing to draw people to, I know there is representation of people of color in Canadian government, but in regards to inviting people of color into decision-making roles where it's not about representation anymore, but also what is the government doing to help people of color in those situations represent or make policy decisions that directly affect the community?
It's so important. The quality of the leadership that we get, whether elected or in the civil service, the quality is directly dependent on how that service, how those representatives reflect the actual communities that we are there to serve. So the importance of this can't be overstated. There is something in the federal government called the Black Caucus. So this was formed by an MP named Greg Fergus. He's an MP in Hull, Aylmer, a region of Quebec, just outside of Ottawa. He's an African Canadian. And the Black Caucus is for Black parliamentarians, but also for Black staff members that work on Parliament Hill. It's also for members of Parliament like me who represent significant communities of color. So I was very happy to be welcomed into the Black Caucus. The question you asked is what is occupying the nightly calls of the National Black Caucus now that I'm a part of. We are trying to figure out concrete actions that we can bring to the floor of the House of Commons that will result in a much better representation, whether in civil service or whether among elected officials, so that we can start to change what has been generations of lack of representation, of systemic racism in some of our largest institutions in our country. And so we can start to challenge those intergenerational lines of power and privilege that have controlled our national discourse. So this group, I'm so proud of them. I'm so proud to be a part of it, and I think we're going to see some really big things come out of that.
Yeah, so good thing that you mentioned that. So you personally, what are the one-on-one steps that you show in your daily life to reflect that Black life does matter as a movement?
So I want to put that in the context of generations of systemic racism. So we know this exists in policing, it exists in education, but the way that I have seen it most closely in my life, it really comes back to my career, which is around urban planning. I was at Africville on the weekend for the Protest by Prayer, Black Lives Matter event, and that Africville was a community that was literally erased in just a few short weeks in the name of progress and in the name of urban renewal. We all know the story, the terrible story of the houses destroyed and so forth. My profession, city planning, has a history with systemic racism too. So that's where I have in my career gone to work on this matter, trying to find ways for equitable housing, for equitable communities, equal access to grocery stores, to banks, complete neighborhoods, affordable neighborhoods. So there is a lot of work to be done there. My primary touch point sort of today and this week and last week and for the last 5 years as the MP here has been building relationships and listening closely to members of the African Nova Scotian community and of the newcomer community to understand what experiences people are having, what's going wrong, what's going right, and then bringing what I learned back to the floor of the House of Commons. You know, if I could share one short story.
Sure.
I think everybody remembers last week when the Prime Minister was asked a question about the United States and the protests, and he had a long silence, a 21-second silence. That was on a Wednesday. And on the Tuesday night before that, just, you know, not even 12 hours before he was asked that question, he was on our Black Caucus call with us. And that particular call was arranged so that members of the Black Caucus, primarily staff people, could just tell him their stories of how racism has affected their lives, how it's changed them, whether it was when they were a kid or in university or on Parliament Hill, or heartbreakingly when they're out in the community with their children and experience racism in front of their kids. It was an extremely powerful series of testimonies, and the Prime Minister was visibly moved by this. And I know that the next morning when he was pausing for 21 seconds, all of those stories were, it's very emotional, isn't it? We're in his mind, and they're in my mind every day now too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So yes, so it's really moving to actually hear that. And I remember this past Sunday, yes, in Africville, we actually saw you there. And thank you for the support that you're bringing to our community. And one question that I had for you as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Infrastructures and Communities was, within our communities, how can we better accommodate prisoners who are reintegrating into our society? What strictures can we put in place in order to make them marketable for job employments, gaining literacy, sufficiency, gaining employment, and abstaining from substances and problematic behaviors? What are we able to do, and where is the funds coming in order to put these social reintegration buildings standing tall within our communities for healing, not only for those people, but also the people that suffer from segregation and that are also marginalized by today's society?
This is such a big question. You may agree with me that the most important thing that we can do to help people reintegrating is to prevent them from going to be incarcerated in the first place. You know, what went wrong in our communities that people found that they were in a hopeless position and had no choice but to turn to criminality or to find themselves in situations that they didn't control. Any solution to ending this cycle of systemic racism in the criminal justice system or any system, I think, begins with understanding that first it's real, and that we have to be giving people equal opportunity. We're all the same, and no one can be treated better or differently, and we're be given different opportunities. So I think the federal government and the provincial government and the municipal government will all be making significant changes to help people to prevent from ever finding themselves in those situations in the first place. And that can be mental health support, that can be education support, that can be recreation programs. It can be so many things that are missing, I think, right now. Your question was around infrastructure. Yes. It's hard to know. Infrastructure are things that we build out of bricks and mortar and steel. It's hard to know what we can build.
Or what old infrastructures that are already put in place that maybe the government think that those infrastructures could give the opportunity to people to visit those infrastructures and benefit from. Let's say, for example, you did great work. I love our library in here. The library of Halifax is beautiful. I spent so much time in there. Good. And possibly there could be programs. I'm not saying, because I'm not a specialist, it's just a suggestion.
No, there are no bad ideas, and ideas are better when they come from the community. So please go on. Well, I can tell you this. Here's an example. There are a shortage of places for youth to meet in the city. There are a shortage of gymnasiums. So these are things that we could actually build that would help to improve people's lives so that they have alternatives to choosing paths that have become normalized over a long period of time because there weren't other opportunities. So there are things to build. Just as important as the things we build, though, are the programs that we design and the supports, the social supports that we can offer. And I know that we have a long way to go. I think we've come a long way in the last 5 years in Canada, but we still have work to do, without question.
Perfect. Good thing that you mentioned that. I have a question regards to post-COVID and post once we're out and about lives, being there and actually doing the work. I know there's a lot of conversation piece that is going on right now. I wanted to ask you personally, I know earlier you mentioned few things that you would like to see implemented, and what are the one-on-one, like for example, I was thinking about like how to make our community better, and we have this conversation a lot of times. If you talk to people of color, they tell you exactly what it is that is bothering them. They tell you exactly where the problem lies. So I know we're saying these are the things we want to do. When it comes to the action part, for example, like people in the government going to university, creating forums to listen to people, tell their stories and implement policies that support them. What do you think moving forward, post all this conversation piece, how do you think we are going to see action in the community, like just helping people of color succeed better in our community?
I feel very inadequate to answer this question. I'm a white male of privilege, and my role is to listen and try to change government policies. I can't put words in the mouths of the community. I need to elicit the words from the community. So it's very, I feel inadequate to answer that question because I don't have those answers. And it's why the conversations are so important. And I understand that now is the time to move beyond conversation and into action. But the way we're going to do this is in part, and I don't think that those conversations ever come to an end. I think we have to continue to have them. Maybe I could say this. It was a very big moment when in Halifax when there was an apology for Africville. And it took some years after the apology before the church was rebuilt. The Africville church was rebuilt. That was a pretty big deal. It's not nearly enough. And what I'm hearing from the community now is that the church, as I'm sure you know, is really used as a museum. And when there is going to be a service, it's a lot of moving things around, and it's kind of a dual purpose facility. And what I'm hearing in the community, one idea, and I don't know how broadly it's held, but I'm hearing it from some people, is that the church really needs to be a church. So maybe there is another way to commemorate the memory of Africville next door or nearby, so that the community can have their church back. I don't know how broadly held that is. One parallel type of project that is bubbling up in our community has to do with the Indigenous community. And that is the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center on Gottingen Street. Touches thousands of lives every year. They run over 100 programs there and help people every single day in every stage of their development and recovery. And they're completely overrun and over capacity. They desperately need a new Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center. And all of that conversation that we were talking about, they've had those, and it is moving toward a place where it's looking more and more likely that a new friendship center will be built. So yes. It's really good. It's so important, and I raised that to show that it's possible. That all the talking and conversation and consensus building and teaching, it leads somewhere. It does go somewhere.
Can I just ask you a quick question concerning, let's say, those infrastructures that you mentioning that are being put in place? There's also one that I recently, one research that I recently did. Please let me know if my numbers are wrong. But it turns out that right now there's only one detox facility in Dartmouth with 13 beds. And that facility is used to help people with who are fighting addictions to come and get the help and support that they need. And it is set there for the population of Halifax and Dartmouth. Is that so? And if that is so, what are the plans moving forward addressing this issue? Because I think it's really big.
Yeah, there's an epidemic. There's an opioid epidemic in the country. It's extremely serious. It's discussed often in the House of Commons. There is an national opioid response plan,
and it's mostly the small minority, like the indigenous people. I know you fight a lot for, and it's really important that us and them we get those infrastructures. So
it is the as you, I'm sure you know, in Canada the Constitution declares that healthcare is the responsibility of the provinces, and the provinces don't always welcome federal interference. There's a bit of there can be a bit of a turf protection there. The facility you mentioned in Dartmouth is funded by the province. There is another one on Gottingen Street, direction 180, that helps people to safely get through their addictions, and the federal government does help to fund that one as well. But you're absolutely right. If we are going to, to your previous point, prevent people from winding up in a place of need, or even worse, in a place of incarceration, we need to go back to the beginning of why people are getting there in the first place, and we all have to help each other.
Yes, and yes, that is really important. And I know that we've taken most of your time, but I'm really sorry. I have one last question. I know that you're within the Parliament, and now with the all this move going on right now, we're talking a lot. You hear a lot of talk about the police defunding. Do you think that is a good idea? And if let's say that is not, if that was to be a good idea, where do you think those funds would be allocated to? And what do you think about having peace officers who would go into communities and be directly in touch with those members of those communities?
Well, I was watching what happened with the mayor of Minneapolis yesterday, and he was asked by a mob of what appeared to be thousands of people, would he immediately commit to defunding the police and disbanding the police department? And his answer was no, and he was quickly booed from the stage because that's not what the community wanted to hear. In a later interview, he elaborated and he said, look, if the question is, do we need to examine how our police departments work and disentangle the systemic racism that exists with them? And do we need to figure out how to have mental health responses to 911 calls instead of armed responses?
Yes.
And do we need to humanize and demilitarize our police forces? And the answer is yes, I agree with all of that. But it would, to defund, to reduce funding, maybe look at it as reallocating funding,
yes,
sort of a weaponizing or militarizing of police to a more humane helping police presence is where we need to be going. The fact is that as our justice system works now, the police are what get people before a court of law. That's how if someone does commit a crime, or if one of us are assaulted, we rely on the police to get them to the court of law. But we need to figure out how to do that, all of those functions, humanely. So I think there is a real discussion around what police budgets are used for. And I was really happy to see the Prime Minister take some leadership on the use of body cameras, for example.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, that's at the end of the line. Like no one ever wants to get to a place where body cameras are even needed, or the data that's on a camera. We want to intervene way before it ever gets to that. But right now, in our moment of transition, when we really need to have other eyes on these situations, I think that's really important, while we also go about the important work of rethinking and reimagining what our police departments can be.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Fillmore. We really appreciate
thank
the
you.
conversations. Before we go, I have one very last conversation. Is more for our audience listening and people in our community, because at the end of the day, it is about our community. What would you say is the best course for young people like us to share our ideas to you as it pertains to our
please
community?
tell us.
Well, you can, first of all, it's a little different right now because of the COVID-19, but in normal times, and soon again, I hope, my office door is always wide open on Brunswick Street, 1888 Brunswick Street. People can come in, drop in, you can make an appointment. For now, we'll do it by telephone or by Zoom call, the way we're doing today.
Yes.
Telephone number there is 902-426-8691. And my email address and social media contacts are very easy to find online.
Yeah.
I would welcome any conversation anytime, and especially when we start to come out of the pandemic, to do it in person will be very gratifying.
Yes. I follow you too on Instagram. So
Me too. I'll follow you too. And I think you also follow me back as well.
I do indeed. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. We appreciate it. Of course, you'd be hearing back from us, because our goal as young people living in the community is to make changes, and we want to see them happen. I have been in Halifax almost 8 years, and I've seen the city progress, but we really do want to make changes that affect us.
And be part of it.
Leaders. We want to talk to people that have the power to enable us, and we thank you for coming on this platform.
Thank you so much.
Sharing your ideas and listening to us. We appreciate you. Virtual hugs, everyone.
You're very kind. Will you allow me to reflect that back on you and give you virtual hugs? You are leading the change with conversations like this. You're being the change in the world that you want to see. And I'm so grateful that you're finding your voice and that you're using it so effectively. So thank you, and let's continue to work together.
Thank you.